I rise today to speak in favor of HF 600, though I am sure that is not a surprise to most of you. Unlike some of the statements made today, I do not think this is a waste of time. Someone is criminalized for cannabis every 48 seconds. It impacts millions of people a year, and over 2/3 of the nation wants to put an end to that. The government hasn't just made it virtually impossible to safely access cannabis, but it implemented a system of prohibition that has robbed people of their jobs, their homes, their freedom, their peace, and for too many, their lives. This is an urgent issue, and we should absolutely be discussing this today. I have long been a cannabis legalization advocate, and I frequented the Capitol long before my community granted me the opportunity to do so in this capacity. I've visited with many of the members and staff, many of whom are still here today, to amplify the voices of Minnesota cannabis supporters, to empower people to make their voices heard in our government, and to rally around a model for full legalization that we could all get behind. I learned a lot during that process, but one of the key takeaways was the diversity of the supporters in our activist community. It's what I would consider a very multi-partisan and multiracial community. I organized alongside people who identified as Republicans, Democrats, Green Party, No Party, Libertarians, legal marijuana now voters, and grassroots legalized cannabis voters. The people of Minnesota have overcome their differences to come together to tell us, loud and clear, that they expect us to do the same and take the steps to end prohibition. You know, I wasn't going to share this part of the story today, but after hearing some of the debate tonight, I think it's really important that we remember where prohibition came from, recognize the danger that it poses to society, which are far greater and more severe than what I've heard yet tonight. Cannabis prohibition will reach its 84th year in this country this year. And I could talk for a long time about the rotten roots of prohibition, but I'll leave us with this shortened version. A few months after prohibition was enacted in 1937, Colorado arrested Moses Baca, a 23-year-old Mexican-American man, and sentenced him to 18 months in prison for having 7 grams of cannabis. We've talked about, from Representative Franke about size limits, and so I'll give you another example for those who may not know how much that is. 7 grams, that's about half the weight of a single serving coffee creamer. Harry Anslinger was the Washington, D.C. mastermind behind cannabis prohibition, and he sat front row in the courtroom as Moses was made a national example. And over the next 3 to 4 decades, Mr. Anslinger sharpened prohibition's arrows, and he began launching attacks at Black and Latinx communities nationwide. As the years went on, cannabis prohibition became the cornerstone upon which the prison industrial complex and the war on drugs were built. John Ehrlichman was an aide to President Nixon when the war on drugs was launched, and in 2016, he exposed what that administration's philosophy was. He said, "We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or be Black. But by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and the Blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities." Not only are the roots of cannabis prohibition morally corrupt and draconian, it didn't even work. It doesn't effectively curb cannabis growth, distribution, or use. Taxpayers pay $3.6 billion annually to enforce prohibition laws and make about 820,000 arrests a year. Yet it's not even delivering on the results that we're paying for. For example, it's generally expected that prohibition protects youth and young adults from accessing cannabis. We've heard debate today that there is a collective will to protect our kids from getting their hands on cannabis. But we need to be clear that our current system doesn't do that. We are not protecting kids. From 1975 to 2012, 9 out of 10 high school seniors said cannabis was easy to access. After this country started legalizing, we began to see those numbers drop. Youth don't have to show an ID to buy it from their friends. They don't have content labels to warn them about what they're consuming. They have little to no access to educational information about what safe use looks like. And they have an incentive to lie about it for fear of being in trouble with their schools, their parents, or other authorities. Prohibition has not protected children from getting their hands on it. It's also generally expected that prohibition curbs overall use and keeps our communities safer. But more than 42 million people have used cannabis in the last 12 months, and 22 million people use it every month. More than 52% of the country's tried it at least once, and prohibition has not stopped people from using cannabis. Enforcing prohibition means that law enforcement officers spend less time pursuing dangerous, violent crime or providing support to firefighters, paramedics, or even their own families. Unregulated cannabis products with unsafe additives pose a risk to unknowing consumers. Illicit cannabis markets also often run alongside other illicit drug trafficking, where grievance and conflict can't be resolved through legitimate avenues like civil dispute or lawsuits. It also is disproportionately enforced. So in summary, prohibition is not keeping us or our communities safer. There's countless other reasons that it's failed America, and there's no good reasons to keep prohibition in place. Prohibition has caused far more harm than good, but thankfully, we get to do something about it. We get to learn from the mistakes of our past. We're here today to do better because now we know better. While what happened before us may not directly be our fault, it is our responsibility to do something about it. And it's up to us to finally bring an end to this failed system of prohibition. Members, the question before us today is not whether or not we think people should or should not consume cannabis, or whether or not we agree or disagree if this bill will become law this year. The question before us today is whether or not we believe that we should act in the face of a failed, ineffective, and morally corrupt system, and whether or not it should remain in place when its devastation is looking us right in the eyes. Full legalization of a regulated adult personal use cannabis market is the solution. This bill will correct our current course. Legalization stops criminalization and moves us away from a failed draconian system to a safe regulated market where youth access is restricted, consumers are protected, and Minnesotans are safer. It opens the opportunity for new businesses to create jobs. Colorado has over 1,700 new businesses and over 40,000 new jobs. Minnesotans testified in our committees this year that they're leaving the state to start businesses in the states with legal markets. This bill allows Minnesotans to stay home and create jobs right here. It raises revenue. In 2019, Colorado raised $290 million, Washington $460 million. In a time where we are seeking to raise revenue, this is the bill that does that. This is a self-sustaining and profitable market that is worth our investment. And we must continue to raise the revenue to fund our futures and the opportunity to make sure Minnesota doesn't miss out on what's before us today. This bill also promotes personal freedom. People consume cannabis for a variety of reasons, many of which we've heard about on the floor today. And ending prohibition honors Minnesotans' dignity in their choice to consume a product that they find is helpful in healing in their lives. There's a lot that this bill does, but this, at the end of the day, is a product of many years of collaboration between community and government. And I ask for your support so that we can prevent people from losing their jobs, their homes, their children, their livelihood, their peace, and their freedom. And I want to say thank you to all of the House members and community members who have helped us get here today, and the amazing staff who have helped put this together. Thank you so much for all your dedicated time and energy, and I would ask you for a very green vote today. Thank you.